You're listening to Copy Chief Radio. Get all the episodes and join the community at copychief.com.
I think what's interesting about these interviews is that you can prepare to a certain level, and you always should prepare to a certain level, but you can also be very over prepared. And most of what's important is like being right here in the moment, just like feeling out that conversation with the person as they are right now. Where's your headspace at right now? Are you ready to like think through a couple things from your career?
I'm reflective.
When are you most creatively active?
In the morning. Well, actually, you know what's interesting? There's two times, but they're very different creative headspaces. So I always try to preserve my mornings for pure inspiration and lack of distraction. So, I get up, I even set my coffee maker to the best of my ability for when I think I'll wake up that next day. Sometimes I'm good boy and I go to bed at like 11:30. That's rare. Normally it's more like, is it 1:30 already? I really need to go to bed. So I'll set it for like 9:30 and I get up, my whole morning coffee time, I'll have a notebook nearby and I just try to allow for any inspiration that isn't a panic to do. Like, oh, I forgot that. I got to do that thing. That kind of blows my morning out of the water if I get into that. And so ideally, I'll have morning brain for inspiration and idea, and I'll just start working on it for a good hour or something. The other time is at night because I live alone now. And so my spatial energy is largely under my control. For better or worse, I am a wine drinker and I am a medical marijuana subscriber. And so when I'm in the evening unwinding, there'll often be music. And I don't watch a lot of TV. I don't like handing my brain over to Hollywood. It's a nice escape sometime, but it isn't where I find inspiration. And so it'll be a lot of sitting and listening to music and going down musical rabbit holes. And then if I'm inspired, getting up and dancing. And I'll sometimes dance for like an hour or two, just in the mirror, trying to become a better dancer and those things. But I consider that very important creative time because a lot of times in whatever that looks like, I'll get an idea and then I get out the notebook. And sometimes it even leads me to the laptop or even GPT and it'll become a work session.
What role does wine or medical marijuana play for you as like a creative?
The wine I could probably do without. It does allow you to relax a little and, just chill more. But alcohol can be a bit of a crutch. And if it were only alcohol, I wouldn't expect creative sparks, right? It'd be more of an escape. The marijuana is very productive for me. And I'm a lightweight. I went many, many years without using it at all because I never want to be too high. I'm like that guy. I'm like, I don't want to hear people go, this is the best stuff. I'm like, not interested. The reason I use marijuana is because I like that it makes the world cinematic. I don't often leave the house after I've smoked, but when I'm here and I'm in a safe, controlled environment, music I've heard 100 times sounds brand new. I'm hearing new things. I'm really tapped into a sort of higher thinking version of myself. And that's where I find the greatest inspiration comes from.
Often great writing is about slowing down a lot more than you think you have to and just observing. And I think marijuana can play a really great role in that specifically. I want to talk about observation because I think that's a skill you have either intentionally or unintentionally honed very specifically. What are your thoughts on that? Is it something that you have done intentionally, or do you think it's more innate to you that you've just always been a naturally curious, observant person?
It's a really good question. Somebody asked, maybe it was you recently, were you a part of the conversation where I was talking about the Indian family?
You might have to refresh my mind about
giving
that.
blood. Okay. So this happened last week, actually this week. And somebody asked me when I described it to them, do you see things that way because you're a writer or are you a writer because you see things that way? It was such a small moment, Lola, but you'll probably appreciate this because you're the oldest of many daughters. So the family and forgive my cultural ignorance for not knowing the exact terminology, but mom's in the full garb. I'm assuming Muslim, but the daughters are in sort of like normal American street clothes. But they're just this beautiful family, clearly like very together, locked in. But there's three daughters, and there's a clear sort of hierarchy and a lot going on, even though there's not a lot being said. So they sit and they're sitting, and then they all go in, and then they all come out and begin waiting again, which I don't quite understand when you're just like there to get blood drawn, but that's their situation. And I'm observing and I'm sitting close to them. When they come back out, there's a row of benches here and a row of benches here, and mom sits and the three daughters sit here. Well, when the youngest daughter sits down, the two other daughters get up and they move on either side of mom, as if to say, you're not welcome right now. And the youngest daughter, for a quick moment, pouts, and I can see her deciding how she's going to handle this. So she pouts for a second, and she gets up, and she not only goes to sit next to what appears to be the second oldest daughter, she pushes the chair next to her all the way up against her chair, and then scoots up in the chair, almost like taunting her, like, I'm as close to you as I'm allowed to be right now, and you're not getting rid of me. I just read so much from that little instance of human behavior, and had this vision of how that child's going to be in the world as a result of the decision she made and her relationship with her sisters. And it was meaningful to me, and I've pondered it quite a bit. And again, I think that's what being a writer is that you see the smallest thing that just most people wouldn't ever notice. They would just be thinking, let me get in here, get my thing done, and get on my way. And writers observe and are deeply curious about what they're seeing and what it means. And so I think I'm a writer because I have that innately.
In today's world, everything that our world has makes it very difficult to get into a headspace where you are just observing without having to make any kind of conclusion about it. Mostly because I think information's coming at us so fast nowadays that we can hardly keep up with how much we're processing. Do you have any practices where you intentionally slow down your mind, or any observational practices where you're just intentionally getting away from the noise and the craziness of the world to focus in on observing specific things?
That's a great question. And the simple answer is that I protect my mental space always. And so I spend very, very little time on social media. I do not have a TikTok account. I do not have a X account. I have Facebook and Instagram, and hardly ever go on there. And the reason is not because I decided I needed a digital detox or anything. I know that there's more interesting things for me to figure out in my own head, in my own experience, than I'm ever going to get from having information shot at me. And like most people will say, by the time I'm done in a doom scroll or whatever, a mindless scroll through social media, sure, I'll have some laughs and some things will be interesting or entertaining. But at the end of it, whether it's 10 minutes or an hour, I just feel a little empty and like ate too much sugar or something, overstimulated. And I just regret that I spent the time doing that. And so the simple answer is my practice is that just by instinct, I don't give over my brain very often. And the result of that is that my goal always, I'm constantly checking my vibration, my energy. Example from today, I had to change the light bulb over the stove that's like part of the microwave. Unbelievably complex operation if you've never done it before. The little housing of the light bulb itself had to fit in just a way where the door was attached to it, but still able to swing closed. And it took me 3 or 4 tries to figure all this out and then do the simple operation of putting the damn glass back up. Several times along the way, I became overwhelmed with frustration just because it was, you're trying to put a little screw and you're like, why isn't it going? And I every time would catch myself and I would just breathe and I would say, okay, this is amusing. This is not no bad can come from this going wrong. We're fine. Just enjoy that you're learning something, and it's going to feel great when you finally turn that screw and it all works and you turn the light on, and just focus on the outcome. So that's just a little instance of, and I have to tell you, I consider that a luxury. And I've made a lot of sacrifices and worked hard to have a life where I can check myself in a moment like that and just try to enjoy. If my car breaks down, I'm like, okay, I've just entered into a new story, and we're going to play the story out, and we know it's going to work out. It's unfortunate. Sometimes you find yourself in moments where you go, how is this my life right now? How is this happening? Like some really often when you're traveling, you're like, how could this many things go wrong in an hour? And what do I do to get out of this? And those are, but I think the more present we can be in the planning of those moments around where, there's a risk factor to be considered all the time. So it's like you want to be conscious about where you're going to be in the world and how you need to show up there. But you also have to give into the moment and try to be super present in the moment, because I think the outcome I'm looking for, and that a lot of writers are looking for, is like, I want to put myself in a position to be able to observe and experience something new and different and really ingest everything that it means.
That's beautiful. Where's your favorite place to people watch or study humanity?
I have to think about that. It's not like the mall, because, if you go to a place where why people are there and they're there to do a task, it's not that interesting. I don't find the airport to be interesting people watching. I find it to be overwhelming, and everybody's having to focus very hard. And so you just see like the most frustrating parts of humanity in those instances, because everybody's just trying to do their thing. I would say it's like at a Saturday morning market, or just sitting downtown and watching people, at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., they're out doing something maybe they didn't expect to do that day, or something they chose to do spontaneously. I feel like that's, to me, the more interesting. I like to see what kind of choices people made and how they showed up to that choice.
Are you talking about fashion here?
Well, that's part of it, honestly.
Yeah.
And that's also why I love dance, and I love seeing people dance. To me, the best people watching ultimately would be if I was on, say, a sidewalk cafe, and there was a band either on the sidewalk or inside a club with open access. So people are kind of milling in around music, because the most interesting thing to me is to see who's willing to dance, who can't help but dance, who instinctively comes upon music and goes, oh my God, let's check this out. And who's like, let's not be bothered by that's loud, And so that's really interesting to me, because it's a life moment, and you learn a lot about how they're interacting with a thing like that's going to determine how they feel for the next 10 minutes to 2 hours,
And one thing, I think, to tie it back to your story of watching a family and kids interacting, one thing that's very interesting about studying children and watching them interact is that they haven't developed the social skills. They don't know half of the social games that are being played around them yet. And so their reactions are very real, very raw. Whereas if you're watching adults, for the most part, you're having to see past maybe 5 masks before you're getting to the core of the emotion they're feeling, right? The person who turns the other way and gets uncomfortable when they see dancing and music happening in an area probably had one moment where they were incredibly embarrassed out on the dance floor one time, or a parent who told them they couldn't dance that one time and they just haven't had the guts to get out there. And now they pretend like they don't care at all. And it's been this story they've told themselves for 25 years now. They don't even know that it's this script that's playing in the background.
Right.
But what you see as an observer is this initial reaction. That reaction is honed over years of learned behavior, learned social games, stories you've told yourself. Whereas a kid's reaction doesn't tend to be tainted by a lot of that. There's something so pure and human about watching the way that they think and the way that their interactions have an impact on the world around them.
100%. I would say another thing I love observing is parents with their children and that dynamic. I always remember, for some reason, this sticks in my head. I was in a Chick-fil-A eating a sandwich, and there's across the aisle from me is a mom and her 2 sons. One son says, I want ketchup. She goes, okay, get ketchup. He gets out. The ketchup is there's like a shelf and it's kind of high up. Well, he doesn't get there and go, Mommy, I can't reach the ketchup. He climbs up on the thing like a monkey, gets the ketchup, comes back down, sits down. Mom isn't worried about this whatsoever. And I can see other parents and people in the restaurant going, oh my God, does she know her kid's climbing on that thing? And I thought to myself, that kid's going to be fine. You know what I mean? So I love when I see instances of parents giving their kids some agency and how they get things done. I think that's crucial.
Is that how you were raised?
Yeah, pretty much. My dad was the kind of parent that only wanted to, I don't mean this insulting if he were to hear it. He was a little more passive and he would kind of come in and lay down the law or this or that. My mother was a beautiful free spirit and loved spontaneity and loved running errands with my mom was a blast. She would crank the music and we would sing in the car, and she would see a friend and pull over and talk to them for 20 minutes. And it just felt like, oh, this is a beautiful way to exist in the world.
Did you get your creativity from her?
Yeah.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
What are the biggest lessons you've learned about raising your own children from them, if you'd have to summarize it up in one or two?
Mostly to listen, to try to keep yourself from lecturing. And when it comes to their passions, to encourage it and then stay out of the way. So I can tell you the best piece of parenting advice I ever heard or read, I read it in a book, was that kids, when they're teenagers, and this is probably not just teenagers, but oftentimes when they have a problem, they just want to be heard. And it is very, very hard for a parent, even if they know better, to not try to fix and solve. But when I read, this therapist said she gave this challenge to parents and they're always shocked at how well it worked. And I had the same experience. And so the challenge was, when your kid is ranting about something that's affecting them emotionally, instead of saying, well, it's happening because of this and do this instead next time, you just say, wow, that sounds really hard. And I thought when I read that, if I did that with my son, if I said those words to him, he would look at me and go, what's the matter with you? Is this a trap? He would totally call me out on it. But sure enough, within a few days that happened. And I said those exact words. And to my shock, he went, yeah, it is hard. And then he went on for another 10 minutes to tell me how he was feeling, how it affected. And then he came up with his own solution for it. And all I had to do was sit there and be a supportive listening ear. And I realized in that moment, I had built more trust with him as a parent. I've had similar moments with my daughter than I ever could have by blurting out Charlie Brown teacher sounding words that he would immediately stop listening to the minute I said them, because that's the dynamic in that relationship at that time.
I think you brought that philosophy into business as well. I remember when you were talking about coaching at Copy Chief and obviously all of the work that we've done there. One statement that you would make is something to the effect of, there's nothing better than letting people have their own experience. I think it doesn't just apply to child raising, but it applies to a lot of things in life when it comes to relationships and communication. And I loved that you brought up just repeating the emotion and the feeling that you caught from the thing the person said. Because if we are to bring it back to interviews, simply accepting that emotion and understanding and sitting with it, and then allowing the person to kind of explain what that feels like for themselves in the lived reality, sitting back and letting them actually talk through what that experience is for them will often tell you a lot more than any solution that you might have been able to give them. A wonderful coaching mentor I had for a long time just said, your entire job is never to give answers as a coach. It's really just to be able to ask the right questions so that the person comes to their own conclusion and solves their own problem, because ultimately they are the only person who really can do that. They're the only one who has the context for it. But someone on the outside can help guide that person to the right conclusion. I wonder how much that impact and the parenting lessons have also impacted you as a coach. Do you think that the lessons that you learned from your parents have impacted the way that you also work with other people and help them reach their goals?
Yeah, I do. At the heart of it, certainly. And that a quote, at least I heard it from Jesse Elder, is there's no greater freedom in life than allowing other people to have their own experience. And it's funny, kind of ties in. When he said that to me, I thought for a second, it's one of those statements that when you hear it, you're like, wow, that is so true. And then I said to him, even with your kids? And he said back to me, and we talk about not responding. It's like, you asked the question, so what do you think? And then he just left me with that. And I did change. I think I changed as a parent that day. And then it becomes a struggle, and this relates to coaching of, well, this kid's relying on me for guidance, and in coaching, this person's paying me for guidance. But what I have discovered that's a parallel is that, I don't want to make up a number here, but 80% of the time, the person already knows the answer or knows what outcome they want. Your best value to them is a trusted sounding board to maybe explore some options, but not decide for them. You can't get people to do something they don't really want. And so it's way more productive to help them decide what they really want and feel good about it, and then help them design a path based on that.
We talked about coaching, writing, creativity, all of these aspects that I know have made up your career. And one thing that fascinates me, even though I've heard the timeline a ton of different times, right? Like comedian turned copywriter. I had your elevator pitch memorized because of doing accelerator calls and all of these other things. But I think the reality of dropping out of high school and starting a creative career on your own, the reality of realizing I'm about to have a kid and I need to quit this comedy thing because I need to make money. The reality of going cold turkey and, starting this new copywriting thing, and every connection that you made and every step forward that you made, I'm sure it all had to be incredibly scary. What gave you the inner confidence to still keep going, push through it, and get through even at those really difficult times when you did things that were completely against the norm?
Mm. Well, I really believe that in order to accomplish all that, you need a few things. You need support from your family and the other people your endeavor affects. And I was incredibly fortunate to have a wife and partner who believed in me and would encourage me and really created the space for me to do it and screw up and learn and all those things. If she had a different expectation or criteria for how quickly I succeeded or those things, it would have been much more complicated. But from a personal standpoint, I do believe you have to really want the thing you're going after. And when I found copywriting, it was like a miracle to discover a second thing in life that I felt uniquely qualified to be good at. But this time, there was actually a lot of money to be made if I got good at it. And I also knew I had a lot of work to do on myself it caused me to say, what led to me quitting comedy? What would I have done differently? So that made it an extra valuable kind of miracle. Is I get a do-over, and I think there's meat on this bone. And so when you find because I would literally, the hair would stand up on my arms when I would think about, I found copy and I would think about it. And so it really became an obsession. And I think you need to have blind ambition around a thing. And I say this all the time, copy may lead you to places you can't imagine. But if you're driven by it, trust that wherever it takes you, what you learn along the way about copy and persuasion and psychology is going to serve you. And let's face it, it's very rare in life when something comes into your life that becomes an obsession, a healthy obsession. And I think without that, you're going to burn out and you're going to move on and you're going to look for something else.
Obsession can't be maintained over time if you don't care about the thing that you're obsessed over. And I think that's what makes good writers or great writers so great as well. It is that they are obsessed. And I mean, that's a lot to put up with, as everyone knows.
Yeah.
Writers have very interesting personalities, but it's always worth it. I have one other question, because you talk about writing as like, or copy as the second thing that you felt uniquely qualified and skilled to do. I'm assuming, was comedy the first?
Yeah. Yeah.
What was it about comedy that was like the thing that you knew you were good at? Was it the writing, or was it something else?
It was the craft. Like, it started with the pure need for validation and acceptance. And I was very insecure in my physical being. I wasn't good with girls. And it was the way I got attention. I could be funny, and it felt really good to have people know me for something. And so that was the impetus. But how I knew it would be part of my life was because I obsessed on the craft of it itself. When I would watch stand-up specials over and over and over and over again, and really go to bed that night thinking about, why does that joke go there instead of there? And, oh, I know. I would just really think about the choices that were made and how that led up to. It's the same thing we do with copy. It's like, why did they do that? I wonder how many other headlines they had. Or that's what it was. That's how I knew I would spend time in it, is because I was obsessed with how it actually worked, not just the cause and effect of getting a laugh.
Do you wish you'd made it big?
I don't think so. I really don't, because I think you have to follow the signs in life. I'm proud of myself for quitting, because I had two things I trusted. One was that I was very young when I started, so I'm on the road full time by the time I'm 21, and even legal to be in the places that are paying me to work there. And I'm working with guys who were then probably younger than I am now. And I was sad for them, because I was thinking, there's no better comic to kill this room tonight, but nobody's going to remember their name tomorrow. And I can see in their eyes, they're not getting their break. This is it. They can maybe get better gigs, or maybe they can work colleges, or they can work country clubs, or get on a cruise ship and sustain. But they're going to be talking into a microphone to people who won't remember their name tomorrow for the rest of their lives. And that's not good enough. That's not stable. I don't want that. I don't want to be at the mercy of that. The second thing was, in show business, and I, believe me, a firm believer in you can manifest a destiny if you're determined enough and smart enough and crafty enough. However, there is a very powerful system in place in show business. And there are certain people with little tokens that mean if they give you one, you get to go to the next stage. And I saw a lot of those tokens being handed out around me, and nobody ever wanted to give me one. And instead of getting offended, I took it as a sign like, hey, it may be even more valuable that nobody's giving you that token, because a lot of people get a token right when they're about to quit, and it leads them to only wasting a couple more years chasing what could be. And that to me would be more frustrating than just getting out at 30 and having the energy to start a whole new thing, you know?
So we've talked about observing humanity on the outside, but I think it's even harder to be able to be a casual observer of the things happening to your own life, because it is your own lived experience. And it sounds like that's what you did in this situation. Do you feel like you're able to observe your own life in the same way that you would casually observe another one's life in an unbiased way? Or what do you think about that?
Probably to a fault.
Wow. Can you tell me more?
Uh, yeah, I overthink a lot of things, and not in a way that keeps me from moving forward all the time, but I observe other people, and they just don't ponder or need to ponder as much as I do everything that's happening to them and what it means and what they can control and what they can and where they belong and how they can be helpful. And they just go make stuff and do stuff, and they learn, and they do it again and again and again. I know so many people in business who are business owners who are involved in, 5 to 7 or more businesses. And I cannot wrap my head around. I constantly ask them, I'm like, okay, so let me get this straight. You buy a business, And then you're responsible for it growing, but you can't be bothered with being involved. What do? You just hire good people. I'm like, I hire a lot of good people. And I've tried to not pay attention, but it doesn't work out. Is that because I'm not letting go? Or it's just a different DNA? It's a different mindset. For better or worse, I'm a very introspective person. I'm constantly searching for what something means. And I do annoy myself with it. So the answer to your question is yes. I don't know if it's to my benefit or not, but absolutely.
I think it can be. I think any of these skill sets can be used to someone's advantage if it's intentional. But a lot of people don't take the time to, sit and observe their own life from an outside perspective. They just like take it one day at a time and experience the lived reality of everything happening to them. Well, I know I could probably interview you for another 90 minutes. Just one final question. It's basically if you had to give yourself a simple piece of advice starting out your career or at the point where you were about to make that like a big decision of making the leap, what would it be? Because career advice from someone who has built a truly one of a kind life, I think is something that I, as a creative, would really want to listen to. You've talked a lot about the fact that you made yourself unhireable, but the typical job is not the kind of thing that you would have ever been able to land. And I think the audience that you have, including myself and a lot of the other freelancers and creatives who are following you, don't really need to hear career advice from people who've lived the traditional thing. They've gone the corporate route. We like to hear advice from people who've built exceptional, like one of a kind careers like yours. And so with that in mind, what would you tell yourself 20 years ago, 30 years ago at different crux points in your career?
I would say that develop your soft skills more than your tangible skills, because what you'll eventually learn is that people do business with people they like or trust or believe in or can relate to. And you may not tick all those boxes with everyone, but just being present. One thing I have, again, instinctively, it's not like I give myself credit for it, but I could be, say, at my own event at Copy Chief Live and get into a conversation while there's way more sort of important things happening, or even somebody going, hey, we got to go. But I'm talking to someone who has flown to be at this event and really would value a piece of time with me. And I'm not doing it out of obligation. I'm doing it that I want to be in that conversation as much as they do. And I don't want to rush it or end it, because all we have is the moment we're in. That's the only promise. So I'm not calculating it by, oh, well, I served this person in value. Because if that happened, then there's maybe another 100 people there that I didn't get to do that with. So the only principle I can go on is, am I being fully present for this person right now? We hear all the time about great leaders. They have an amazing presence because they're amazingly present. And they always say, I hate this person as a politician, but I got to tell you, I met them at some dinner. And for that 5 minutes, I felt like I was the only person in the world. I think presence, and it goes back to observation and not being distracted. The saddest thing in life to me is how everybody's walking around staring at their phone, even as they're like crossing a parking lot, or missing all of life around them because of that damn screen. I get if you have a relationship and want to like binge on some TikTok for an hour or something, but don't let it stop you from being in the moment you're actually in life. There's a really interesting ecosystem happening around you all the time, and it deserves to be observed. And I think you'll find a lot more meaning in that. So that's what the advice I would give. I was like, don't stop being present out of fear that you should be doing more or something else instead. Presence is where all the great lessons come from.
Look, I get it. I know there's so many communities, I'm doing air quotes, communities for entrepreneurs out there, all filled with their own version of overnight experts chirping at you from behind the screen. You got your Facebook groups, your Clubhouse rooms, just experts galore. How often do you feel like you're being pinballed around from thing to thing and picking up a little bit, a little piece there? How much of that is actually making it into your brain and your fingers and your business and affecting your money? How many of these people are actually out there in the field getting their hands dirty and testing to find out what actually works and what flops? Well, in the Copy Chief community, a real community, you get shoulder to shoulder with the most active, successful marketers working in the trenches today, all while learning from industry legends who rarely teach anywhere else, if ever. Copy Chief is an amazing community, super newbie friendly. Also, you'll find, elite level marketers and copywriters in there. They're all working to become the best at their craft, get paid top dollar for their skills, stay ahead of the competition by keeping their finger on the pulse of what's working now. That's the X factor when you're backed up by a community and you can get any question you have answered by people who actually do this stuff and can tell you from real world experience what to do for your project, for your offer, for your funnel, for your clients. Man, you're unstoppable when you've got that kind of confidence. Go check us out at copychief.com/join. If you've never been a member, you're going to see what you've been missing and you're going to say, where has this been all my life? And if you've been a member in the past, I would invite you to come and check out all the new stuff. We've completely updated all the tech. So we're on brand new platforms. Everything is slick and smooth and easy to access. And it's never been better. Copychief.com/join. I'll look for you inside.
One thing I was going to mention, we all hear this all the time, and it's so true, about people only asking questions because they're curious to someone else. And at the end of, say, an hour, that person saying to them, man, you're a great person. You're so interesting. And they don't know anything about you, but they do know that you were curious and you had good follow-up questions. And that's very fulfilling, even if you didn't say much. And we just had that experience. I feel very fulfilled after that conversation. So for you, engineering it, what's it like for you to know that you have an agenda, because you need material that you can then go turn into content and work with? But sort of, where's your mind going through the whole conversation?
When I'm kind of visualizing where I want an interview to go, I don't feel comfortable going into an interview unless I have some sort of target or bullseye that I can aim for, knowing what is the basic content that I want to get out. Now, for the clients that I'm working with, it's always very nuanced, because normally what these interviews are actually doing is helping them develop their messaging one step further. Ultimately, that is, that's what we're doing. I mean, I'm sure that with what you've talked through here today, you could probably look at the transcript, re-listen to this call, be like, oh yeah, actually that thought that I had about the way my mom raised me or how my mom treated me in this would be a perfect opener for an email later on or something like that. And you'll find that that's how these conversations tend to work. But I also know that, and I mentioned this in the interview, you can't generate these human moments. So it's a very fine line to ride. So if I have just one specific target that I'm going for, just a general idea, I want to come out of here with some basic idea on X topic. What I'd written was kind of I was doing the prep for this, and I wrote it in an email to Copy Chief as well. The biggest thing I wanted to hear from you in this interview was the elements that made your creative career so special, and what is it that allowed you to make some of these very countercultural decisions? What's driven you to have this one of a kind career and get to this point? Now, that doesn't sound super focused necessarily, but what I was able to do in that is, I think, come together with a really good story arc over the time of basically the power of observation and the power of being a silent observer of the world, both around you and then your internal world. And I think that it seems to be the way that you have operated in your career.
Yeah, it brings to mind a moment. I remember, you asked about my parents, and then I talked about my mom. I think as the interviewer, one thing I always try to do is ask a question. And again, it's being present to, are they going to elaborate? Like, I don't have any conclusions for observing that family. It's just still interesting to me. So I'm still kind of looping on it, but it was worth mentioning. But there was no big aha takeaway or anything. Whereas if I sat and wrote a Sunday email about it, I would have to come to some conclusion to sort of like finish off the email, right? But then you said, we're talking about my mom, and you said, did you get your creativity from your mom? And I just said yes. And you like waited long enough, and it's like, okay, he's not going to elaborate. You could have said, what are some ways you think? But for whatever reason, you determined, okay, we'll move on from that. You know what I mean? It's like those moments that I think you can sense the energy of, let's move on and carry that energy somewhere else. But you have to know where you want to go, but also allowing moments to happen that you can plan for.
That's a really good call out, because I could have stayed. Like, as a person, I think childhood impacts people's decisions a lot more than we ever mentioned. So that's what I want to know about people. It's how did your parents impact you? How were you raised? And I was very curious personally about the fact that your parents did seem to raise you kind of hands off, meaning they weren't controlling every aspect of your life. For creatives, that's the ultimate child rearing to have, because otherwise you're second guessing yourself at every stage. And I think when you're building an alternative type of career, or one in show business or in entrepreneurship, where you have to be the person who's talking to people out there, opening doors for yourself, like being kind of gutsy in the way that you approach relationships and situations, you will second guess yourself if you constantly had a parent telling you, don't do that, move here, change this, here's the next honor roll to reach. Like, it's not the ideal raising. I was very fascinated by that in your personal childhood, but what I wanted to know mostly was how that impacted your career. And I think we had the information that we needed as to like, hey, he had a fairly loose, simple childhood. And that, I think, kind of set you up to be able to flow with a comedy career, for example, at 21 years old. But I still think that would be a great thing to dig into more, because I'm sure you're probably even already thinking about other elements that your parents had an impact on your life.
Yeah. And again, also because the things we don't know that we'd find out if we dug more, for instance, right? Like the fact that my dad is, in the final stage of his life. He has late stage Parkinson's. I'll go tomorrow and spend like 3 hours with him, because he actually doesn't love me coming over that much, because he's like super self-conscious about his existence right now, which is funny because I never considered him sort of that vain. But his wife is his caretaker and her sister's in town. And so I'm basically going to hang out with him while they get to go have some free time. Every time I spend time with him now, it's so meaningful because it could be the last. That would lead into a discussion about what is life really? And hey, you're 55. And so you're probably thinking about mortality more than you ever did, even though you feel great. But who are we kidding? It's not like when you're 30, you feel invincible and you're never going to die. So there's all these little choices. And I think it's part of and that's why video is so important. I think about this a lot. Pretty much all of my first podcast, Truth About Marketing, was only audio. We weren't even on screen together. And I liked it that way because I thought there's a purity of me only hearing their voice that I make different choices. And now for the last 3 or 4 years, it's just naturally you're on video together. And I like it better because you can see if they're sitting back and they're tugging on their chin and they're contemplating. And you can see if maybe they were about to go somewhere that they didn't. You can say, seemed like you had something else to say on that, if you think it's worth it or not. You know what I mean? So I love the game of it, of no two interviews will ever be the same, because things will come up that didn't come up and they'll be followed or they won't. And it's an organic thing that only happens between two people in that one moment.
And I think that's what's interviewing is, simply reverse engineering good conversation and then turning it into a skill and understanding how to use that. And I think that whether you get out of a good interview or a good meeting at work or a good conversation with another person, it always comes down to pretty much the same things. And it's not just the questions that were asked or the response that was made, but it's like the connection between the two people, like that, the human energy kind of going between the conversation. And I think that's why, if you are like you're doing right now, just nodding your head and going along or agreeing or saying, yeah, that was really interesting, right? Like that is as important to the conversation moving on as the questions and the explicit things. So I definitely agree that video is easier. Although, if you are a yapper like me, it is important to keep the mute on when the other person is talking, because I will tend to jump in a little bit too quickly in conversation, I've noticed.
Huh.
And if I just let it last a little bit longer, one, it doesn't ever sound as awkward as I think it will. If there's a little bit of a longer pause or silence, if the person has actually concluded their thought. And second, often that longer pause allows them, like if you just hold it a little longer than you think is comfortable, that second burst of conversation that comes after that is normally the real stuff.
It's a really great point. And, it also kind of depends on your subject, because some people, whether it's the headspace they're in that day or whatever, just aren't feeling that reflective. And let me ask you this. So what do you do if you encounter somebody, maybe it's somebody, you've been in process with, or a client, but you can tell that day they're just like, it's a task. Do you have like moves you do to get them in the moment so they're present? And
you cut the interview.
Wow.
If they're absolutely too busy and it's like, no, we can't get to this for another 2 weeks, it doesn't make sense, we're on a deadline, whatever needs to happen, then we'll get the content that we need to, absolutely, and just like do a 30-minute version. But you know how it is, like, no, I know when I hit the end of my creative block, I'm done.
Yeah.
You're not getting good answers out of me. And everyone has that. And I think part of it, like part of interviewing, is noticing like the very human reality of what it feels like to be interviewed, and understanding that if the goal is high quality output and they're feeling nervous about the high stakes, or they have all this other stress on them, we're not going to get the output that we need. So we're better off regrouping and doing it tomorrow or Wednesday or some other time.
That's smart, because it shows that you have a very specific goal and intention for what comes out of that time together. And you'd rather facilitate that happening for sure than try to force it for somebody who's not prepared to go there.
Cool. So your clients learn to trust you too, because what you're showing them is like, I care about your energy. I care about how you feel coming to this conversation. And some days just, you don't have the creative energy, and that's okay.
Okay. So I have a question for you, and maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, because this is part of what we'll be teaching, and get paid to ask questions. And we've even talked about having a deeper training potentially someday, where I think this aspect of it might apply more. But knowing how I work with GPT, and it's a little similar to how I talked about social media, it's amazing in parts, but then I reach a point of saturation where it just feels like no more popcorn or whatever it is. When you take all the meaningfulness of a conversation and you begin to put it through the processes that include language models, how do you determine if it's had some soul or heart pulled from it? And if so, how do you put it back?
That's a good question, although I don't know if it's the right one. I normally know where the soul or heart of the conversation is just by having had the conversation. And I think most of us can probably pick that out if we just sit and think about any conversation we have for a little bit. And so when I'm using LLMs and everything to write, in the background and having a process behind the scenes, I'm using those processes differently depending on the type of content that we talked through, or how well this person articulated this very specific story, or how their energy was at a certain time during that story. And normally the transcript picks up a good amount of like where those key moments were. So by the time I get out of the conversation, I'm finding the posts and the content or the marketing message that we need to develop or the speech that we need to develop or whatever we're creating for this person in that month, I'm coming to it because of the stories that they told normally, because stories are what communicate ideas in the best way. I haven't found any other mechanism that works so well for just getting an idea across to someone. And I have used that pretty strategically in the way that I develop content. And if I don't have some type of story angle or some like good hook that is like emotional, related to the human experience that person has had, then I'm probably not spending a lot of time on that content just because what my main focus is like uncovering these core human emotional moments.
Right.
So I suppose if I feel that if I think that the soul has been taken out of a piece by just like going through LLMs too much, then it's a sign to get right back to the actual video and the transcript and probably get as close as possible to that person's actual words. One element of great interviewing that you'll find is if you've asked the right questions, if you've honed your skills as an interviewer enough, and the interview has gone well, you should probably be able to pull that transcript of the person's words straight up, have that story together, and with very light editing, not even needing to use an LLM to do that, you'll have something that is their voice, quite literally, because it's them talking. And the closer you can keep to that original dialogue as possible, especially if it's the stories that you're trying to find, and that's what you're using the interview to get, the easier it is to keep the soul of the piece.
Well, that's a really good answer. Well, it reminds me of, I shared with you the Cal Fussman interview, right? The thing that always struck me about his column, what I've learned is that it's like you said, it's literally just quotes from the interview. And maybe there's 10 or 20 lines at most, but from an hour and a half interview, and he's so selective. All you're seeing is direct quotes from the subject, no other context, nothing. And yet, just by reading those quotes, you get such a sense of the person and the stories and even how the interview must have went and felt. That really struck me, the simpleness of that format. And it goes back to what you said. It's like the heart of it is there because you got it recorded. Anything you do with it from there, and if you're, say, just doing some social posts or whatever, you could get endless from even that conversation we just had. But you're usually telling a bigger story for a specific purpose, and that's the real heart of what you got from the conversation.
And isn't that what marketing is in general? Like, it's never been about listing the features and benefits of your product or the service that you have, or, whatever you're doing in the industry that you're changing. It always has been about telling a story that your ideal client or customer wants to be a part of.
Right.
And I think even like one thing you said, the interview that we just had, one thing that some people say about interviews like that is when you're in the middle of it, it feels very disconnected. I'm throwing questions like out of left field and a lot of times and completely switching the subject pretty often. That often is a very good thing because you start to see the common thread between all of these varied stories that comes up throughout the conversation. And often it does not need to be made explicit in the conversation for the person on the other end to kind of like come to that conclusion themselves. And that's what good writing is as well. Like, you're not telling the reader what to think.
Right.
You're just telling what the experience was. You're drawing them into the story, and then you allow them to make their own conclusion about that. And I think that like ultimately that is what these interviews come down to. Sometimes I'll take the interview and like we've got the good stories, we've got a couple things that, we've worked on, and then I know I'll have to make an explicit conclusion. Like, I'll have to draw this together for the reader to really understand how this connects to the business this person is running.
Yeah.
However, most of the time it's right there. Like, if you've been in the interview, if you've been in the conversation, you already know like what that conclusion is going to be.
Yeah, it's like you're getting the ahas and seeing the hooks and the threads as they're talking. Like your future writer mind is already working on it, right? Yeah.
You know how it is.
So good.
Like, it's how you start seeing the world after a while.
Yeah. First time I've had this thought, but I wonder, because I've been podcasting and interviewing people for 10 years now, if that's another reason, like that has fueled my curiosity about people in general. I think it's, again, it's chicken and egg thing. It's like somewhere in the middle. I've always really wanted to know. I guess that makes me a good interviewer because I'm genuinely curious. It's also the reason I refuse almost every pitch I get for somebody I don't know to be on the podcast, because I don't want to risk that it won't be an interesting conversation because they're just there with an agenda. And it's just not interesting to me. And so, for better or worse, I typically only interview people I've met and have a sense that we're going to have a really good conversation. And it's interesting that podcasting has become such a huge, and I wouldn't have predicted that, I don't think, 10 years ago, that podcasts would be such a part of the mainstream media. I probably would have guessed that it would stay a little fringe, but almost every celebrity has a podcast, or, is available to be a guest on podcast. And every comedian now basically has to have a podcast. And I think it's great. I just think I love that so many more people have their podcasts that they listen to. To me, it's the opposite effect of what people say. We're more connected than ever, but everybody feels lonely or disconnected. I think listening to podcasts is a true way to connect. I used to always,
long form.
it's long form. I guess that's why. Yeah.
Seeing someone's tweets or seeing someone's Instagram posts or looking at their Facebook or even being on their email list, it's not the same experience as like a lot of good podcasts, 3-hour conversation.
Yeah.
And you only really get to the meat of conversations at like the 90-minute, 2-hour mark, depending on like who you're talking to or what subject you're diving into. I love podcasts for that reason. I think too, being a good interviewer automatically makes you a much better podcast to listen to overall. Because if you are good at getting people to say things that are interesting, that people actually like to listen to, stories, you'll be more likely to be able to keep their attention for a full 3 hours. But I think it's the trust element you brought up at the beginning as well. It's a really great way of landing a job at someone's company, by the way, is if they have a podcast or if they've got like, you have data on that person that if you're just there, you basically get to sit with them for 50 hours or however many podcast episodes they've recorded. Massive advantage if you're trying to, make a deal with that person or anything like that. So one of my favorite interviews, ironically, is a 3-hour interview on the Lex Friedman podcast. He's is at MIT, studies math, absolutely like very dry, straight to the point, fantastic interviewer, like really, really good at asking questions and getting people to talk about their expertise. I would say he does a ton of research on his guests and he's able to talk very knowledgeably on very deep subjects. And a lot of the guests he has are very niche experts. But he had Mr. Beast on at one point, and the first thing he asks is some question like, "How often do you think about death?" Or like, what does that play in your life? And it starts this amazing conversation between Lex and Johnny. And Mr. Beast is basically like, I never get asked questions like that. Oh my God. And then he goes on to this whole thing talking about how he's pre-recorded YouTube videos to be released at like very specific years. And if he dies before them, these YouTube videos will still be released at that time automatically on his YouTube channel. And people will get to like experience Mr. Beast in many ways, like, but from past. And they were talking about this implication of like being able to load your consciousness onto the internet and have that consciousness still be released to people. Like it's new things of you that have not been released in the past.
Right.
You're gone, but people are still getting to experience this. And they were talking about the implications of that. First question he asks this YouTuber when it's like, you've absolutely won the channel. And of course, they get into the great conversation about all of his tactics because Mr. Beast is notorious for literally saying exactly what he does and just knowing he can outperform and outcompete more than anyone. Point being, those really good questions across the board. I don't care if you're podcasting. I don't care if you're just wanting to use that as a skill set to reach the next level in your career. If you're like trying to build a partnership with someone or pitch your company to someone else, or if you're just wanting to have better conversations with your loved ones, your friends, to me, it's an absolutely indispensable skill set. We've been talking about soft skills. I think it's one of them. I think it's the way that we can be literally sitting here having had full-time careers without ever having gotten high school diplomas. And I think that speaks to the power of skill sets like this.
100%. Great stuff. Okay. All right. Well, they were probably for time more than anything, but this was great. What a cool experience, and appreciate you sharing all your knowledge. If you guys are hearing this, if this makes it out as an actual podcast, then we are live July 1st through 3rd, inviting people into our training, Get Paid to Ask Questions. You now have a lot more context of the value of asking good questions. And we're going to teach you in that program how to turn it into a service that you can provide clients who are very excited about it. It should be clear, hopefully, why AI cannot do what you just heard here. So thank you, Lola.
Well, and not just that, but I do want to say as well, if you're a Copy Chief member, I will be very specifically hanging out in a special club we're creating for this specific skill set we're helping everyone build. So if you're a Copy Chief member, or if you purchase a Copy Chief membership along with Get Paid to Ask Questions, there is a 6-month benefit that comes along where I will be in the club, being able to help answer any questions you have. And I am actively looking to find good writers and interviewers and introduce them to clients. So if you're hearing this, please reach out to me. I would love to speak to any of you. I want to be in contact with as many writers as possible. So if this is something that you're interested in building as a skill set, you know where to reach me.
Love it. Thank you. More to come. See you inside, everybody.
Hey, don't forget your goodies. Head over to copychief.com/copychiefradio to get some great free stuff to help you put the things you hear on the show into action for your business. copychief.com/CCR.